Hello. Before you continue, you should understand what this recording is and what is not. What you are about to hear was never misplaced or forgotten. It was intentionally kept out of public view, filtered through internal briefings, restricted reports, and language chosen to reduce the weight of what actually occurred. Some records remain buried, not because they are impossible to believe, but because accepting them would require institutions to admit there are limits to the protection they can offer the people they serve. This is not a story for entertainment. It is a statement, recorded in sequence, as accurately as memory allows. From this point forward, the account begins. My name is Jacob Yazzie. I am Navajo Tribal Police. I have been in uniform for 16 years, with most of that time assigned to the many farms area in northeastern Arizona. My jurisdiction includes the highway corridor, grazing allotments, unincorporated housing clusters, abandoned irrigation infrastructure, and stretches of land that do not appear on most public maps. If you look at it from a distance, it seems empty. Red dirt, wind, long gaps between lights. If you live here, you know better. I work in places where rules exist, not to prevent accidents, but to contain something that preys on human behavior. Those rules are not written down. They are passed verbally, usually after something has already gone wrong. You do not get a manual. You get warnings. You decide later whether you listen closely enough. I was sworn in when I was 24 years old. I transferred to many farms after my third year by request. I was born in Chinle. This area felt familiar to me. I wanted to work closer to home. I wanted to be useful in a way people actually need, not just in the way reports describe. The first rule I learned out here was given to me by a senior sergeant. In the parking lot behind the substation, we were unloading water cases. He did not look at me when he said it. If a call comes in after sunset, and the location is not clearly marked on the county map, you do not go alone. You wait, even if dispatch says it is urgent. I asked why. He said urgent is how you get moving faster than you should. At the time, I assumed it was about terrain, or wildlife, or people who do not want to be found. I laughed. He did not. I did not push the question. Out here, you survive long enough to learn. By not pressing for explanations you are not ready to hear. The first death, connected to what I am describing, happened 3 years later. Her name was Marlene Sosi. The year was 2019. The location was a seasonal wash, east of Many Farms Lake. She worked as a school bus aide. Everyone knew her. She was the kind of person who waved, even if she did not recognize you right away. The official report listed exposure and dehydration. The supplemental report, which I wrote, stated something else, without stating it directly. She stopped to help someone, walking along the road. During extreme heat, she got out of her vehicle. She followed a voice calling her name, from a place where no one should have been standing. She broke a rule she did not know existed. I was one of the responding officers. I remember her shoes were placed neatly beside the road. That detail did not make it into the final report. It was deemed irrelevant. That was the moment. I understood that compassion is not neutral in this jurisdiction. Many farms has procedures that look like superstition until you see the pattern. You do not follow voices off the road. You do not respond to your name unless you have visual confirmation. You do not pursue on foot into a wash after dark. You do not use personal phones to make contact when a call drops in a dead zone. Those are not folklore. They are containment measures. The night this report truly began, I was working swing shift, late summer, the kind of heat that stays in the ground after sunset. The radio had been quiet for too long. That kind of quiet tightens your shoulders without you noticing. Dispatch called in a welfare check. A family had not returned from a grazing site near an old irrigation intake. The caller was a neighbor. He said he heard children crying. He said it sounded close, then far, then close again. The intake site had been decommissioned years earlier. There was a fence. The fence was more symbolic than functional. I acknowledged the call. and requested a second unit. Dispatch advised the nearest backup was approximately 40 minutes out. I waited. That was me following the rule. Do not go alone. While I waited, the radio crackled, not with speech, with static. That pulsed unevenly, almost like breathing. Dispatch asked if I was still on location. I said yes. They told me my GPS had dropped for about 30 seconds. That happens sometimes. This did not feel like sometimes. When the second unit arrived, the officer stepped out and looked at me. Before I said anything, she asked if I felt it. That was the word she used. Felt. I asked what she meant. She said it felt like someone was waiting for us to make a mistake. We drove together toward the intake site. 2 vehicles. Lights off once we left the paved road. That is another procedure. You do not announce yourself, unless you want help finding you later. The air near the intake smelled wrong. Not rot, not water, something dry and metallic. We heard crying. It sounded like a child. It sounded like it was coming from behind the fence. The other officer took a step forward. I put my hand on her arm and told her to wait. She looked at me like I had betrayed something sacred. We called out. Standard identification. Navajo Tribal Police. Identify yourself. The crying stopped. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was my sister's number. That should not have been possible. I had spoken to her less than an hour earlier. The message read, "Jacob, where are you?" At the same moment, the other officer's phone vibrated. She looked down. Her face changed. She said it was her mother. We did not move. That is another rule. When it uses technology, you do not engage. The crying started again. Closer this time. The other officer whispered that they knew our families. She stepped forward and crossed the fence. The ground did not collapse. It opened, as if it had been waiting for weight. The sound she made was not a scream. It was surprise. We never recovered her body. The report lists presumed deceased. Her name is recorded. What happened to her is not. After that night, procedures changed. Briefings became shorter and more specific. Do not respond to voices that reference family without visual confirmation. Do not trust caller identification. Do not cross boundaries that do not make sense geographically. Those rules did not save everyone. I stayed on duty. I was offered leave. The offer was framed as concern. It was actually containment. When an officer steps away, the questions stop following them. I needed to know which rules were still true. Calls increased in complexity rather than number. Locations shifted while units were en route. Witnesses disagreed on what they saw, but agreed on what they felt. I responded to a call near the old chapter house foundation. A man reported his father had walked into the dark and not returned. He said he could hear his father praying behind the storage tanks. We established a perimeter. The man tried to push past us. He said his father was cold. The other officer moved to restrain him. I told him not to. That is a rule. That does not make sense until you see the result. Do not restrain someone who is being called. The man broke free and ran. We did not chase. We listened as his voice changed. Mid-sentence. Not louder. Just different. Like a dial being adjusted. After that shift, I could not sleep. I began to hear radio static. When the radio was off, I began to doubt whether conversations had happened the way I remembered them. That is another exposure sign. That never makes it into reports. The subject, for lack of a better term, does not rush. It waits for duty, to override caution. It waits for compassion, to feel mandatory. There is one limitation. That is held so far. It cannot cross maintained running water. With intent, not flow. Intent. That distinction matters later. The night the count began to climb, the water was low. Maintenance schedules had been delayed. No one thought to notify us. That is where this really begins. I did not take leave. After the officer disappeared, at the intake, I was advised to. The recommendation came down through administrative channels. As concern for my mental health. In practice, It was about containment. When someone steps away, after an incident like that, questions lose traction, files stop circulating, patterns blur. I stayed because I needed to know which rules still worked and which ones only created the illusion of safety many farms does not allow, the luxury of uncertainty. Out here, hesitation turns into exposure, faster than panic does. The next briefing was held in the back room of the substation. No windows, phones powered down, and placed face up on the table. That detail mattered. Sergeant Begay stood at the whiteboard, but did not write anything. That was new. He said we were changing how we talked about the subject. No names, no descriptions, beyond function. If you had to reference it, you used the word subject. Someone asked if we were authorized to use force. Begay said the only authorized action was withdrawal. He said force implies confrontation. Confrontation teaches it too much. Another officer asked about the one we lost at the intake. Begay said her death would be recorded as line of duty. Recovery would not be attempted. He did not raise his voice. He did not justify it. That was when I understood. The rules were not about saving us. They were about preventing pursuit. After that meeting, the calls did not increase in number. They increased in contradiction. Reports that canceled themselves out. Locations that shifted while units were en route. Witnesses who could not agree on what they saw, but agreed on the pressure they felt. Pressure is not something we log. We should. One of the first incidents, after the briefing, happened near the old chapter house foundation. The structure had been demolished years earlier, but the concrete pad remained. A man reported that his father had walked out into the dark and not come back. He said he could hear him praying behind the storage tanks. I responded with a junior officer. He had been on duty less than 6 months. New officers follow rules carefully because they have not yet learned which ones cause harm. When applied without judgment, we established a perimeter. The man kept trying to step past us. He said his father was cold. He said the prayers sounded wrong, like they were being repeated too cleanly. The junior officer moved to restrain him. I told him not to. That rule is not intuitive. Do not restrain someone who is being called. Resistance accelerates urgency. Urgency reduces discretion. The man broke free and ran toward the storage tanks. We did not chase. We listened as his voice shifted, mid-sentence, not louder, not panicked, adjusted, like a radio dial turning one notch too far. The junior officer did not speak. For the rest of the shift, that silence was noted by no one. The next loss was closer to me. My cousin worked maintenance for the water authority. He was assigned to intake channels east of town, the same system that marked one of the few boundaries the subject respected. He called me directly. That was a violation of procedure. We had instructed family not to contact officers personally after hours. That rule exists to prevent targeted contact. He said the water was behaving wrong. That was his phrase. He said the channel sounded crowded. I told him to leave the site and wait for daylight. He said there was a woman standing in the channel. He said she was not getting wet. I told him to get in his truck. He said she knew my name. He said she said it, the way my mother does. I broke my own rule and drove alone. I did not activate lights. I did not notify dispatch. That violation did not save him. It did keep me alive. When I arrived, the gate was open. The channel was still flowing, but weak. The pumps were offline. That should not have been possible. Remotely, his truck sat with the door open. The engine was cold. I did not hear water. I heard breathing. It came from the channel. I stayed behind the fence. That rule mattered. I called out to him. A voice answered from the channel. It was his voice. It asked why I had taken so long. I did not respond. I manually cut the auxiliary valve. The water surged. The sound changed. The breathing stopped. We found him the next day. Downstream. The report says accidental drowning during maintenance. The supplemental is restricted. That was my first family loss. Tied to this, it did not make the rules easier to follow. It made them heavier. After that, another rule was added. Do not respond to direct contact from family regarding anomalous events. Route everything through dispatch. That rule cost lives. It also prevented worse. Both things can be true. The subject adapted. It began using duty conflicts more deliberately. It created scenarios where every available response violated something. A bus stalled near the highway pull-off. Children inside. The driver reported something. Walking alongside the bus. Matching speed. The rule said, do not approach moving subjects. Duty said protect minors. We staged vehicles to create noise. Horns. Light patterns. We did not exit our units. The subject changed behavior. Not visually. Functionally. It began knocking on the bus door. From the inside, the children screamed. The driver froze. A junior officer opened his door. I grabbed him and told him to stay put. He said they were kids. He stepped out. The knocking stopped. The bus engine restarted. On its own. When we reached the bus, there were fewer children than before. The report lists no names. After that night, sleep stopped restoring anything. I heard radio static. Even when devices were powered down, I began writing things twice to see if they stayed the same. Sometimes they did not. The subject began testing documentation. Reports changed after submission. Time shifted. Names dropped out. Internal review asked if I believed in curses. I said I believed in procedures. They reassigned Sergeant Begay, not as discipline, as knowledge containment. He came to see me. Before he transferred, he told me not to forget things. He said to write them down and not keep them where they could be found. I asked him if there was an end state. He said the end state was boredom or fullness. We existed to delay both. The next major incident happened during a storm. Rare rain. Channels filled. We thought that gave us advantage. A call came from the hospital. A patient had woken, speaking in multiple voices. Staff reported the voices. We're calling them by name. Hospitals are supposed to be safe. Running water. Sterile boundaries. We were wrong. The subject had learned to use systems instead of spaces. Sprinklers activated. Without heat. Water pooled instead of draining. Voices multiplied. Nurses responded to their own names. I ordered evacuation of one wing. That violated protocol. It saved others. 2 orderlies went back for a patient they believed was a child. They did not return. After that, the victims became numbers. Language shifted. Exposure events replaced deaths. Legal approved that phrasing. Meetings continued without interruption. I stopped telling my family where I was assigned. I stopped answering unknown calls. I stopped trusting mirrors. At night, the subject left messages on the terminal displays. Simple sentences. You are tired. You can rest. The limitation still held. It could not cross maintained running water. With intent, we diverted resources to keep channels active. That caused shortages elsewhere. Infrastructure complained, then failed. The night the count increased again, the water authority shut down a channel for scheduled repair without notifying us. They called an overlap. Language creates distance between cause and consequence. I knew before I arrived that the report would have no names. I went anyway. The channel bed was dry, except for a thin line of stagnant water that smelled metallic. Dispatch was overwhelmed. Calls stacked. Voices reported. Near dry infrastructure. I parked angled toward the access road. Exit vector clear. Footsteps approached. Before I saw anyone. Too many. Unsynchronized. Dispatch used my first name. That was not protocol. I turned the radio off. A family emerged from behind the pump housing. They were dry. All of them. The father asked for help. The daughter smiled at me. When her foot touched the stagnant water, the ripple moved inward. I did not fire. I stepped back. I drove away. While they watched, that decision added to the count. Later, review asked why I did not engage. I said engagement teaches it. They marked that as speculative. By the time part 3 began, the structure around us still looked intact. Radios worked. Vehicles started. Paperwork moved. What failed first was confidence, not morale. Confidence is quieter. It is the belief that if you follow procedure, the ground will stay solid, under your feet. After the night at the dry channel, internal review increased its presence. Not investigators, observers, people who attended briefings without taking notes and asked questions that did not have operational value. They wanted timelines. They wanted confirmation that each decision aligned with policy. They did not want patterns. We were instructed to stop using the word subject in written communication. It was considered speculative. Instead, we were told to reference environmental factors or unidentified persons. Language matters. It shapes response. This change slowed things down in a way that felt deliberate. Calls continued. They did not spike. They spread. Incidents began appearing in places that had never produced anomalies before. A grocery loading dock, a church basement, a school playground. After hours, each location shared one feature. Water had recently been diverted, shut down, or reduced. I began keeping a handwritten log. No electronics, no timestamps. That could be altered remotely. Just conditions. Low light, low water, high emotional density. Duty conflict present or absent. The pattern was consistent. The subject could not force action. It could only present options. Bad options. The moment someone chose. It learned. One of the most instructive incidents that month involved a stalled vehicle near the highway corridor. Single adult occupant. Vehicle disabled. No immediate danger. Dispatch categorized it as low priority. I arrived to find the driver standing outside the vehicle. He was calm. Too calm. He said he could hear someone calling from the culvert beneath the road. He said it sounded like his brother. He said his brother had died years ago, but this sounded right. I told him to get back in his vehicle. He asked if I could hear it too. I said no. That was a lie. I could hear something, not a voice. Pressure, like sound waiting to happen. I did not restrain him. I did not approach the culvert. I stood between him and the road and told him help was coming. I did not say when. The call dropped. On its own, the pressure lifted. Nothing else happened. That incident did not result in a loss. It still mattered. Near misses are data. We ignore them because they do not fit reporting thresholds. Around that time, my family started noticing changes. Not the obvious ones, the quiet ones. I stopped answering my phone. After dark, I stopped sitting with my back to windows. I asked my sister to keep water running in her house, even when it was not necessary. I did not explain why. She asked if I was safe. I told her yes. That was another lie. The subject adjusted its approach. It reduced mimicry and increased implication. It stopped sounding like specific people and started sounding like obligation. Dispatch calls. Phrase just right. Community members. Invoking duty instead of fear. Scenarios where refusal felt like negligence. A call came in from a chapter office. After hours, motion detected inside. No power. No water. Maintenance had been suspended for weeks. I responded with another unit. We did not enter. We did not announce. We waited. The motion stopped, then started again. In a different room, the other officer suggested we clear the building. I said no. He asked why. I said because it wanted us to map the interior. We left. The report listed equipment malfunction. Not long after that, I received a call from the Water Authority. Unofficial. A supervisor I knew from before this started. He said maintenance schedules were being altered, without approval, valves opening and closing, in patterns. That did not match demand. He asked if I knew anything about it. I told him to route all communication through dispatch. That was procedure. That decision may have saved him. It cost others. The next loss was a dependent, a foster child named Eli, 8 years old, placed with a family, near an arroyo, that fed into one of the smaller channels. The channel was active, maintained. It should have been safe. The foster parents reported that Eli heard his birth mother calling from the arroyo. She had passed years earlier. They followed him. When he ran, they broke a rule they did not know existed. We found the foster parents near the dry culvert downstream. Eli was not with them. The report listed a missing child. No recovery. That loss changed the way the subject behaved. It began mimicking fear instead of familiarity. Fear works faster. It bypasses deliberation. We attempted a containment operation using mobile water tanks. We created artificial channels. We thought intent could be manufactured. For a short time, it worked. The subject avoided the area. Then it adapted again. It began timing events to storms, moments when channels overflowed. Unpredictably, intent became ambiguous. That limitation weakened. During one storm, an officer called me from his patrol vehicle. He was crying. That was new. He said his daughter was in the back seat, asking why I would not answer her calls. He did not have children. I told him to stop the vehicle, to exit, to leave everything behind. He did not respond. His radio went silent. Mid-sentence. The next morning, his patrol vehicle was found abandoned, near a flooded wash. The back seat was dry. The report listed exposure and presumed drowning. No name released publicly. After that, I was ordered to attend a psychological evaluation. I answered honestly. That was a mistake. They recommended administrative duty, removal from field operations. I refused. That refusal triggered a review. While the review was pending, another officer took my place. On a call near the intake, he followed procedures. He waited. He did not engage. The subject waited with him. Hours passed. Nothing happened. That is how it opens the door. When the officer stepped out to check equipment, the ground opened. We recovered fragments, not a body. I was reinstated, not because I was stable, because I was experienced. Sleep became irregular. When I did sleep, I dreamed of the officer. We lost to the intake. She stood behind glass, knocking from the inside. When I woke, my phone showed missed calls from my sister. The timestamps overlapped. That is not possible. I did not call back. That rule hurt. The next major event involved a school bus, rerouted due to flooding. Children inside. The road crossed a channel that had not been maintained in years. Dry. Cracked. I arrived as the bus stalled. The driver was calm. Again, too calm. I heard knocking from inside the bus, not from the door, from the walls. A child began crying. He said his grandmother was outside, asking to be let in. I recognized the name. She had passed when I was still in training. I positioned my vehicle to block the channel. I activated sirens. Noise is a deterrent. Sometimes, the knocking shifted to the roof. The driver reached for the door lever. I fired a warning shot into the air. That violated policy. It worked. The driver froze. Upstream, maintenance released a valve without notifying us. Water surged into the channel. The knocking stopped. We evacuated the bus. All children accounted for. That was a containment success. It cost me my firearm privileges. Temporarily. Policy does not reward outcomes. It rewards compliance. The subject learned from that. It began waiting for moments when water could not be sustained. Power outages, repairs, drought. We cannot keep intent flowing forever. The night before the count increased again, I received a voicemail It was my mother's voice. She said she was cold. She said she was by the old sheep pen. My mother is alive. I did not go. Someone else did. That is how the report fills. Not with monsters. With decisions. By the time the voicemail from my mother circulated through internal channels, the word victim had already been replaced. Exposure event. That language was approved by legal. It allowed meetings to continue without interruption. I was instructed to stop using names. In my personal notes, names were said to create bias. Bias was said to interfere with objective response. I ignored that instruction. Names anchor memory. The subject prefers blur. The day after the voicemail, I drove past the old sheep pen anyway. Not to check, to confirm absence. That distinction matters. The pen was empty. The gate hung open. The ground showed footprints. That began and ended in the same place. No drag marks. No disturbance. Beyond that, I logged the observation without comment. That afternoon, I was called into a closed coordination session. Tribal leadership, utilities, emergency management, legal counsel. The room was too clean. That is usually a bad sign. They asked if the incidents could be attributed to criminal activity. I said no. They asked if it was environmental. I said no. They asked what it wanted. I said it wanted us to choose wrong. No one spoke after that. They asked for a definitive protocol, something printable, something that could be followed without judgment. I told them that was impossible. The rules work because they require discretion. The subject exploits. Rigid response. They asked for a list anyway. I gave them 8 rules. I left 3 out. Those 3 cause harm when followed without context. One of the omitted rules involved children. The subject had already learned that dependence accelerate response. It had learned that we will always prioritize the many over the one. It learned how to present the one as the many. The next major incident occurred at a group home on the edge of town. 6 residents, 2 staff members. Night shift. The call came in as a disturbance. Staff reported residents refusing to stay in their rooms. They said they could hear singing from the bathroom drains. Drains are water. They should have been safe. I arrived with 2 units. We did not enter immediately. That was correct. We shut off exterior lights. We listened. The singing was familiar. A lullaby in Navajo my grandmother used to hum. One of the staff members stepped outside. She was shaking. She said the residents were crying. She said one of them was my uncle. That was not possible. He passed years ago. I told her to get in my vehicle. She refused. She said duty required her to stay with the residents. That is how it uses us. It does not push. It waits for duty to anchor us in place. Inside the building, water began backing up, not flooding, rising without spillover, clinging to surfaces. The singing stopped when the water reached the door threshold. We did not enter. When daylight came, the residents were gone. The staff member, who refused to leave, was found in the hallway, dry, unmarked. Her eyes were open. She was smiling. The report lists 7 exposure events. No names. After that, I stopped attending coordination meetings. Unless ordered, decisions made in those rooms were too far from the ground. I began speaking directly with dispatch supervisors, passing rules verbally, adjusting phrasing. Language matters. The subject listens. We stopped saying, "Help is coming." We started saying, "Remain where you are." We stopped using names. Over the radio, we switched to unit numbers only. We stopped confirming caller identity, unless visually verified. That slowed things. It did not stop them. My second family loss happened quietly. My nephew was 8. He lived with my sister, near an irrigation ditch, behind their house. The ditch was active, maintained. It should have been safe. One evening, he told her, someone was standing in the water. asking him to come closer. She called me directly. That was a violation. I told her to keep him inside, to keep the water running, to stay with him. She did. Later that night, the power went out. The pump stopped. The ditch drained. By the time backup power engaged, he was gone. The house showed no signs of forced exit. His shoes were by the back door. That broke something in me. That procedures had been holding together. I wanted to pursue, to violate every rule. I did not. I attended his funeral. In uniform, I stood at the back. I did not speak. After that, the subject changed. How it addressed me. It stopped mimicking my family. It began offering absolution. Messages appeared. On my patrol terminal. You did what you could. It is not your fault. That language is dangerous. It invites rest. I began sleeping less. I began to distrust. Moments of relief. Relief is how you miss. The next decision, the next failure, was infrastructure-wide. A maintenance error caused cascading shutdowns across multiple channels. Water pressure dropped. System-wide. We knew before the call started. That would be bad. Advisories went out. Stay indoors. Avoid voices. Keep lights off. Some complied. Some did not. The subject did not appear everywhere. It selected locations with high emotional density. A wedding reception. A birthday party. A vigil. We responded where we could. We delayed. We diverted. At one site, I encountered a man holding a baby. The baby was silent. Too silent. The man said his wife was inside, calling for him. I told him to put the baby down and step back. He asked if I had children. I said no. That was a lie. He ran. We did not follow. When the system came back online, the subject receded. Not gone. Resting. The count was updated. 12. No names. I was ordered to compile the final report, to sanitize language, to remove speculation. I wrote 2 versions. One official, one real. The real one I hid. The rules continue to exist. They are passed verbally to new officers. Some listen, some do not. The subject is still here. It cannot cross maintained running water. With intent, that remains true. Intent requires people. People get tired. Systems fail. I'm still on duty. Reduced hours. Limited field work. Sometimes, when I am alone, I hear my name. I do not answer. By the time the second version of the report was hidden, the system had already adjusted. Around the absence of truth, meetings continued. Schedules filled. The language stabilized. Exposure events. Environmental anomalies. Unverified disturbances. Those terms created distance. Distance is a form of insulation. It protects people who do not stand where the ground gives way. My assignment changed. Without ceremony. Reduced field hours. Training oversight. Call review. I became a filter. Dispatch would route. Uncertain situations threw me. Supervisors would ask whether a call felt wrong, instead of whether it met criteria. That is how institutions protect themselves. They move uncertainty toward individuals who can be isolated later. I accepted the role because refusal would have removed me entirely. There are worse places to be than inside the decision loop. The first incident under this new arrangement involved a false improvement. That is the most dangerous condition we have encountered. 3 weeks passed without a confirmed exposure event. Water channels stayed active. Power remained stable. Calls dropped. Administration called it stabilization. I called it a feeding pause. The subject uses absence to reset expectations. It lets people believe the rules worked. Belief loosens vigilance. Vigilance is what it waits for. During the 3rd week, a junior officer approached me. After shift, his name does not matter here. He asked if the rumors were true. He said people were saying the subject could not appear if nobody acknowledged it. That belief did not come from us. It came from silence. I told him, acknowledgement is not naming. It is response. As long as people respond, it exists. He asked if that meant withdrawal was the only defense. I told him, withdrawal delays exposure. It does not end it. 2 days later, he responded alone to a noise complaint near an abandoned storage facility. That violated the first rule I was ever taught. He radioed that he could hear movement inside. He said it sounded like multiple people working. I told him to withdraw. He said he wanted visual confirmation. That phrase has become lethal. The facility had no power, no water, no access points. That should have produced sound. Backup arrived. 12 minutes later, he was gone. His radio lay on the ground, still transmitting. The transmission carried breathing, not his. Administration labeled it an unsanctioned entry. That allowed them to close the case. I wrote his name in my private log. After that, the subject escalated. Without taking anyone, it moved closer. Officers reported pressure changes in their ears during routine patrols, static without source, a sense of being watched. That did not correlate to direction. Those reports were dismissed as stress responses. Stress is another vector. I noticed something else. The subject was avoiding me. Not entirely, but deliberately. It stopped addressing me directly. It did not mimic my family. It did not leave messages on my terminal. That absence was not mercy. It was repositioning. It had learned my thresholds. It no longer needed to tempt me. It needed to work around me. The next major event unfolded slowly. 6 hours. No single call. That would have justified a response on its own. A crack was detected in the main water channel. Emergency maintenance was scheduled. Temporary shutdown required. Utilities assured us it would be brief. I requested delay. I was denied. We staged units along the channel. We warned nearby residents. We issued advisories. That sounded like drought messaging. The water stopped at 1900 hours. 10 minutes later, the first call came in. A woman reported her husband standing in the dry channel, refusing to come home. He said he was listening to something. 5 minutes after that, a child reported voices coming from a storm drain near his house. He said they sounded friendly. Another call followed. A driver abandoned his vehicle after hearing knocking from beneath the asphalt. None of these calls were urgent alone. Together, they formed a pattern. We cannot respond to all of them. That was the point. I chose the channel segment closest to a housing cluster. That decision added names. Elsewhere, when I arrived, people stood along the dry channel, not moving, facing inward. They were listening. I used the loudspeaker. I told them to step back, to return home. Some did. Some did not. One man turned and asked if I could hear it too. I said no. That was another lie. The ground vibrated. Not violently. Subtly. Like anticipation. I ordered units to withdraw. One officer hesitated. He said his partner was still near the culvert. I told him to leave. He did not. The vibration increased. The channel walls flexed. Not cracked. Flexed. The partner did not scream. He looked surprised. When the water resumed flow, it carried debris. That did not belong there. That event was classified as infrastructure failure. It added 3 more to the internal count. The public count remained unchanged. After that, I was formally restricted from field command. I was told my decision-making was too cautious. Caution is indistinguishable from insubordination. When outcomes are bad, I accepted the restriction. I continued to advise. Informally, the subject adapted again. It began exploiting administrative gaps. Paperwork misfiled. Shift rosters altered. Maintenance scheduled without notification. Each gap created a moment of dryness. Each moment was enough. I started carrying a physical notebook. No electronics. No network exposure. In it, I track conditions, not locations. Low light, low water, high emotional density, duty conflict present. The pattern held. The subject cannot force choice. It can only present options. That means refusal still matters, even when it costs. The next loss, involving a dependent, was indirect. A daycare closed early due to a power outage. Parents rushed to pick up children. Traffic increased. Patience decreased. A mother heard her child crying from a parked car she did not recognize. She opened the door. Her child was still inside. The daycare. I arrived after. The report lists 1 adult, no child. I stopped correcting reports. Correction implies fixability. At home, nights grew louder. I heard water where none flowed. I smelled ozone. I began to doubt whether the subject was external or whether it had simply taught me how to listen wrong. That thought is another trap. Self-doubt redirects responsibility inward. The subject does not need belief. It needs participation. The next time it addressed me directly was during a storm. I was alone in the station. Power flickered. Backup engaged. The intercom activated. Without input, it used my mother's voice. Calm, tired, she said. I had done enough. I did not respond. The voice changed. Not pitch. Intention. It said, others will not. That statement was accurate. I shut down the intercom. Manually, I isolated the circuit. I do not know whether that limited its reach or taught it something new. After that night, I began preparing for failure. Instead of prevention, I started compiling this confession, not as a warning, as a record. Records outlast containment. The subject remains constrained. I maintained running water with intent. That is still true, but intent requires people who believe the work matters. Belief is eroding. The next phase will not look like incidents. It will look like policy, and policy is harder to outrun. By the time policy entered the conversation, the subject no longer needed to be present to cause harm. It had learned how to move through procedure, through scheduling, through language. The first policy change arrived as a memo from regional administration. Standard formatting, neutral tone. It reclassified certain calls as non-emergent, unless visual confirmation of threat was established. This was framed as workload management, officer safety, resource optimization. On paper, it made sense. In practice, it created silence. Calls that would have been investigated quietly dropped out of the system. Dispatchers hesitated. Supervisors deferred. Everyone waited for confirmation. That could not arrive without violating a rule. That waiting is where the subject settled. I was still assigned to training oversight. That role expanded. Without notice, I became a reviewer for incident hesitation, a consultant for when not to respond. That is a dangerous position. The first case, under the new policy, involved a reported voice near a drainage culvert behind a residential cluster. The caller did not claim immediate danger. He said he recognized the voice. He said it sounded like his aunt. She had passed the previous winter. No visual confirmation. No emergent classification. Dispatch logged it. No unit was sent. The next morning, the culvert was dry. Footprints ended at the edge. The report listed no victim. The family listed one. I brought this up during review. I was told policy cannot account for every outcome. That phrase is a shield. The subject began using that shield more effectively than we did. Another policy followed. Maintenance coordination was streamlined. Utilities were no longer required to notify tribal police of routine water shutdowns unless a public safety risk was identified. Public safety was defined narrowly. Intent was not part of the definition. I sent an objection It was acknowledged. No change followed. Within 2 weeks, we responded to a series of calls. Near a housing area, affected by an unannounced pressure drop, residents reported hearing movement beneath floors, not footsteps, shifting, like something settling. Units were dispatched late. By the time we arrived, the water had been restored. The movement had stopped. We found a man, sitting on his porch, holding a pair of shoes. They were too small for him, he said. His daughter left them there because she did not need them anymore. There was no missing person report on file. There was no body. The report closed as unfounded. I added her name to my notebook. The subject also began exploiting training gaps. New officers arrived with updated procedural language, but without the older verbal warnings. The rules that had been passed quietly were no longer emphasized. They were considered anecdotal. I watched a training session where a senior officer dismissed a caution about responding to voices by saying there was no documented evidence. I did not correct him in front of the group. I corrected him afterward. He asked why we had not written it down. I did not have an answer that would satisfy him. The next high-impact event came from an unexpected direction. Not water, not voice, technology. A series of automated welfare checks were triggered through a third-party monitoring service. Elder care units, medical alert systems, devices reported verbal distress. Names were used correctly. Addresses were accurate. Visual confirmation was not possible remotely. Policy required us to wait. We waited. When we arrived, hours later, the homes were empty. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. Devices lay powered off. The subject had learned how to borrow authority. After that, administration issued a clarification. Automated alerts would be deprioritized without secondary confirmation. This reduced false positives. It also reduced response. I started seeing patterns. In absence, entire neighborhoods where no calls came in anymore. Silence is not neutral. Silence means something has been decided for you. At home, my sister stopped asking questions. That worried me more than when she did. She told me my mother had been waking up at night, listening for water. There is no running water near her house after midnight. I told her to keep lights on. I told her to ignore voices. I did not explain. The subject did not approach my family directly again. It did not need to. It let policy create distance for it. Another memo arrived. Budget constraints, overtime reduction, fewer patrol hours. After dark, darkness is when the rules matter most. I argued against the change. I was told data did not support increased night incidents. Data lags reality. That is a known issue. It did not matter. The first night patrol reduction went into effect. A call came in from a church basement being used as temporary shelter. Water had been shut off earlier that day due to a leak. Residents reported hearing singing from the floor drains. The call was logged. No unit was available. By the time morning shift arrived, the building was empty. Blankets folded. Personal items left behind. The report listed relocation unknown. I was called into another review. This time, legal was present. They asked whether I believed our procedures were contributing to harm. I said, procedures without context always do. They asked if I was suggesting policy changes based on personal belief. I said I was suggesting we acknowledge pattern. They did not write that down. After that meeting, my access to certain systems was reduced, not revoked, limited. I could still advise. I can no longer override. The subject adjusted again. It did not rush. It waited for gaps large enough to step through. One of those gaps involved a scheduled infrastructure upgrade. A section of the irrigation network was taken offline overnight. Backup flow was expected to compensate. It did not. Calls came in from multiple points along the dry channel. People reported seeing others standing in the channel, not moving, listening. Units were dispatched piecemeal, no coordination. Policy required confirmation before escalation. By the time confirmation was achieved, the channel had been dry too long. I arrived at one location just as water was restored. The people standing there did not react to the sound. They did not turn. When the flow resumed, the channel carried objects that should not have fit through the intake. That incident was divided into separate reports. No single event met escalation criteria. Together, they represented a failure we could not name. That night, I sat alone in the training room and listened to the building settle. I thought about the rule I had not written down, the one about children, the one about how dependence collapse discretion. Policy does not account for that. It cannot. It requires quantifiable risk. The subject understands unquantifiable pressure. It began using moments when officers were forced to choose between enforcement and care. A call about trespassing near dry wash, where a group of teenagers had gathered. They said they were listening to something. They laughed when told to leave. Policy required enforcement. The rule required withdrawal. The officer chose enforcement. By the time backup arrived, the teenagers were gone. Their shoes remained. The report listed loitering. I started seeing the same names appear on different rosters. Officers transferred out quietly. Dispatchers requested reassignment. Maintenance workers stopped reporting anomalies. Attrition is another form of exposure. The subject did not need to take everyone. It only needed to thin us out. At home, I began sleeping with the lights on. I left water running in the sink. I listened to the pipes. One night, the water stopped without warning. I did not move. I did not speak. It started again on its own. I wrote that down. The next policy update arrived without announcement. Emergency response thresholds were raised again. The language cited efficiency. I recognized the pattern. The system was protecting itself by narrowing its field of responsibility. That is how inevitability looks from the inside. I began preparing for the next phase, not by planning response, by documenting erosion. This confession is part of that. Not to stop what is happening, to make sure. It cannot say we did not see it. The subject remains constrained by maintained running water with intent. That is still true, but policy does not have intent. It has compliance. Compliance creates dry ground, and dry ground is where it waits. By the time the seventh phase began, no one was using the word escalation anymore. They used adjustment. Adjustment sounds reversible. It is not. The subject had reached a point where it did not need anomalies to create effect. It had learned how to let the system do the work for it. Gaps widened without anyone naming them as gaps. Responsibility fractured into categories too small to carry weight. I was still officially assigned to training and review, but that title had lost meaning. I was no longer shaping response. I was observing erosion. The first indicator that something had shifted again came from dispatch, not a call, a pattern. Callers began reporting the same event multiple times from different phones. Same wording, same pauses, same emotional cadence, different numbers, different locations. Dispatch flagged it as a system glitch. I did not. When calls repeat perfectly, it is not duplication. It is rehearsal. One night, during a reduced patrol window, 3 separate callers reported a woman standing near a dry culvert along the highway spur. Each caller described her The same way. Not visually. Functionally. They said she was waiting. They said she looked patient. They said she knew their names. No unit was available. Under the new deployment schedule, dispatch logged the calls. They advised callers to remain inside. One of them did not. By morning, there was no woman. There was a parked vehicle. With the door open, the engine was cold. Inside the vehicle, a notebook lay. On the passenger seat, the first page contained only names. No numbers. No dates. I recognized 2 of them. I took the notebook before it was logged. That was a violation. I did it anyway. The names were not victims. They were officers, dispatchers, maintenance workers, people who had rotated out, people who had gone quiet. The subject was not just thinning us. It was tracking us. Around the same time, maintenance reported unusual wear along the interior walls of a major channel. Not erosion, compression, as if pressure had been applied from the wrong side. Engineering called it stress fatigue. I called it listening. A storm system moved in later that week. Not severe, not enough to justify emergency posture, just enough to complicate intent. Water flow increased inconsistently. Some channels surged, others lagged. Intent fragmented. Calls came in from a housing cluster near the eastern boundary. Residents reported voices moving between yards, not calling, not shouting, just present. Units were dispatched in pairs. That rule still existed. It was one of the few that survived policy review. I responded as secondary. I was not supposed to take point. I did anyway. The houses were dark, lights off, as advised, water running, where possible. I spoke to a man standing in his doorway. He asked if I could hear them. I said no. That was habit now. He said they were arguing about him. He said one voice wanted him to come outside. Another said to wait. That detail mattered. The subject was simulating internal conflict. It was learning how to delay without leaving. We told him to stay inside. We told him to keep water running. We left. That was correct. 2 houses down. A woman did not answer. Her door, her porch light flickered. Her water was off. Policy required visual confirmation before forced entry. We waited. The waiting felt wrong. Not urgent. Wrong. When we entered, after backup arrived, the house was empty. Furniture intact. Food on the stove. Cold. In the bathroom, the drain was dry. The pipe beneath it showed fresh scoring. That incident did not add to the official count. No body. No witness. No violation documented. I added her name to my notebook. Later that night, the storm passed. Water stabilized. Calls dropped. Administration sent a message praising coordination under challenging conditions. That message made me angrier than any loss. The subject responded to that tone shift quickly. It began exploiting morale. Officers reported feeling relieved during quiet shifts. That relief became suspect. When you begin distrusting relief, burnout accelerates. One officer requested transfer. After reporting, that silence felt watched. The request was denied due to staffing shortages. He stopped reporting. After that, another officer made a mistake during a routine traffic stop. He heard his name from the ditch beside the road. He turned his head. That was all it took. The incident report cited distraction. The injury was non-fatal. The exposure was not. After that, internal communication shifted again. A directive discouraged informal sharing of experiences. All observations were to be routed through official channels. That slowed pattern recognition to a crawl. The subject did not need speed. It needed friction. I began speaking less. During briefings, I saved my warnings for individuals. Quiet conversations in hallways, in parking lots, the way the rules had been given to me. Some listened. Some smiled politely. One of those who listened was a dispatcher nearing retirement. She asked what would happen if she stopped responding to voices entirely, even if they sounded right. I told her the truth. Refusal delays exposure. It does not guarantee safety. She nodded. She said delay was enough. 2 nights later, she stayed on the line with a caller, longer than policy allowed. The caller was a child. The voice was calm. It said it was lost near a dry wash. The dispatcher did not dispatch a unit. She kept the child talking. She asked about landmarks. She asked about water. The call ended without escalation. The next day, the dispatcher did not come to work. Her house was found intact. Her phone lay on the kitchen table, powered off. Policy listed her absence as unrelated. The subject had learned patience from us. The next high-impact event was not violent. That made it worse. A revised emergency response matrix was rolled out, region-wide. It formalized what had already been happening. Higher thresholds, stricter confirmation requirements, clear language about liability. I was asked to review it for training impact. I read it 3 times. The matrix removed discretion from the moments that needed it most. It assumed stable terrain, predictable threat, clear escalation cues. None of those applied. I submitted a written objection. It was acknowledged. The rollout continued. That night, a call came in from a senior care facility. Water pressure had dropped unexpectedly. Residents reported voices in the plumbing. Policy categorized it as maintenance. No unit was dispatched. When maintenance arrived, the next morning, 6 rooms were empty, beds undisturbed, clothes folded. The report cited elopement. I was not allowed to add commentary. After that, I stopped trying to correct documents. I focused on preserving sequence. Order matters. The subject began testing boundaries. Closer to the station. Static on internal radios. Footsteps in hallways. After hours. Intercom activations. With no source. I responded to one of those incidents. Myself. I shut down circuits. Manually. I isolated panels. That worked. For a while. Later, during a routine system test, the intercom activated again. This time, it did not use a familiar voice. It used my tone. It repeated a line from an old training briefing about discretion, about restraint. It was not mocking. It was practicing. That night, I reviewed my notebook. The names had begun to repeat in places they should not have. I crossed one out. It reappeared on the next page. I stopped writing names. After that, I used initials. That felt like compromise. It was not. The subject does not need full identification. Partial is enough. Toward the end of that week, Water Authority announced another planned shutdown. Short duration, minimal impact. I requested delay. Again, I was denied. Again, units were not staged. Policy did not require it. Calls began. 20 minutes. After shutdown, they were different. This time, no panic, no urgency. Callers reported feeling watched, not threatened, observed. One caller said it felt like being evaluated. No action was taken. By the time water was restored, the calls had stopped. The following morning, 3 unrelated reports came in. A grocery store employee found shoes in the freezer. A teacher reported a student absent who had never been enrolled. A maintenance worker logged footprints on a dry channel wall. None of these triggered response. Together, they formed a picture I did not want. The subject was no longer feeding on response alone. It was feeding on normalization. I began preparing for disclosure, not public, controlled. This confession is part of that preparation. There is one more phase. After policy, it is not collapse. It is acceptance. We are close to that. The subject remains constrained by maintained running water. With intent, that limitation still holds, but fewer people are tasked with maintaining anything now. Fewer believe intent matters. The ground is dry more often than not, and the system has learned to look away. Acceptance does not arrive loudly. It arrives as routine, as forms that no longer ask certain questions, as silence that stops feeling temporary. By the time the final phase set in, the subject no longer needed to imitate anything familiar. It had learned how to let people complete the pattern on their own. Names were no longer necessary. Voices were optional. Most of the work was being done by what we chose not to address. I was formally removed from all advisory roles. 3 weeks after, the revised response matrix went live. The notice cited redundancy. My position was said to overlap with updated policy guidance. I was offered early retirement. I declined. They reassigned me to records review, night shift, limited access, no field response. Records review is where truth goes to be flattened. Dates lose texture. Language becomes interchangeable. Loss becomes administrative. That is where I finished compiling this confession, the final incident that confirmed what acceptance looked like. Did not involve a voice. It did not involve water. It involved a decision made correctly under policy that resulted in permanent absence. A call came in from a residential edge near the grazing allotments. A man reported seeing people standing in the distance at the boundary fence. They were not trespassing. They were not approaching. They were just there. He said it felt wrong. That was his only description. Dispatch categorized the call as non-emergent. No visual threat. No immediate danger. Policy was followed. I listened to the recording later. The man stayed on the line for 11 minutes. He asked if someone could just drive by. Dispatch advised him to remain indoors. He said he could hear water, even though the nearest channel was dry. No unit was sent. The next morning, the fence line was undisturbed. No footprints. No signs of activity. The man was gone. The report lists voluntary departure. No follow-up. That was when I stopped believing we were still delaying anything. I began preparing the final section of the record, not for the department, for whoever hears this. There are rules that still matter, even now, especially now. The first rule is the one most people dismiss. Do not go alone, not because of terrain, not because of wildlife, because isolation accelerates persuasion. The second rule is about voices. Do not respond to your name unless you can see the speaker. Do not accept familiarity as verification. Familiarity is the tool. The third rule involves water. Maintained running water with intent creates a boundary, not flow, not presence. Intent, a channel that someone is actively responsible for. A system that is checked, maintained, and believed in. That limitation has not failed yet. The fourth rule is the one that hurts. Do not restrain someone who is being called. Do not chase them either. Both actions increase urgency. Urgency reduces choice. The fifth rule is about technology. When contact arrives through devices, without explanation, do not engage. Do not answer. Do not reply. Do not confirm receipt. The sixth rule is incomplete. By design, there are situations where following procedure will cause harm. There are situations where violating it will do the same. If you are forced to choose, delay. Delay is not cowardice. It is containment. The seventh rule is the one That will be ignored. Children collapse discretion. Dependence. Create urgency. Faster than any threat. If a situation presents itself as requiring immediate action to protect a dependent without verification, you are already being tested. I am telling you this because the system no longer does. I still review records. At night, I still see the same phrases. Repeated, unfounded, unverified, environmental. Those words do not describe absence. They describe refusal to look. Sometimes, during quiet hours, the intercom activates, not with a voice, with tone, the cadence of an announcement. Without content, I shut it off. I log nothing. At home, I keep water running. I check the channels when I can. Maintenance is understaffed now. Intent is thinner. People ask, why I do not retire? Why I do not leave? Leaving does not change the ground. It only changes who is standing on it. The subject remains constrained by maintained running water. With intent, that is still true. It remains unable to force choice. It can only present options. What has changed is how often people are willing to choose. If you are hearing this and you work in emergency services, utilities, infrastructure, or any role where procedure replaces judgment, listen carefully when something feels wrong but does not meet criteria. That does not mean it is nothing. It means the criteria were built for a different problem. Do not accept silence as improvement. Do not accept reduced calls as success. Do not accept reassurance as resolution. If you hear your name from a place where no one should be standing, do not answer. If a situation demands immediate compassion without verification, slow down. If water stops where it should not, assume the boundary is gone. I'm still on duty. In name only. Reduced hours. Limited access. I'm still here because someone needs to remember what was delayed and what was not. The report lists 12 victims with no names. That is not because names were unknown. It is because names make patterns harder to ignore. This confession is not a warning meant to save you. It is a record meant to outlast denial. The subject is patient. It does not rush endings. It waits for acceptance. That is where we are now. If you choose to remember one thing, remember this. Rules exist to contain something that preys on human behavior. When rules become more important than the people they were meant to protect, the boundary shifts. I have said what I was told never to say out loud. Do not assume there will be time later.